Hello, this is National Chess Master R. Rats at chess.com, continuing my coverage of the team match between my video lessons group and CARPE DIEM. And all the early results that are coming in are the match just started last Sunday, 6 days ago, and people are playing too fast. And thus we get a lot of quick games. Anyway, let's run through this one. We see the Ruy Lopez, nothing new here. It's all pretty much book. Now c3 is an interesting move. I think what black should do is take this pawn. I'll explain why in a moment, but it doesn't happen that way. Black plays b5, and here what white needs to do is play bishop c2, and this gains a tempo over the main line of the Ruy Lopez. So I think b5 is not correct here, but taking the pawn on e4 is. But now white doesn't take advantage of the move order and plays b3. Now we're in a normal main line Ruy Lopez. And when black castles kingside, he's signaling he wants to play the Marshall attack. So you have to be ready for it. Or you have to maybe play what they call the anti-Marshall, play a4. Okay? And I had a game I did a video of where somebody played the anti-Marshall, and black found a way to play the Marshall anyway. It was a rather amazing game. It's in the members post your best games thread. It's one of the early videos. I think it was Navat Sam that played the game. So it's one of the first videos in there. Anyway, here comes the Marshall. Of course, black could play d6 and play a mainline Lopez. Anyway, white accepts the challenge, takes the pawn, and in the original Marshall gambit that Frank Marshall played against Capablanca, he played the older knight f6. White has to be ready to beat that too, but modern theory suggests c6 is the better move. And now suddenly the attack starts. And we're still in theory, and as far as I know, theory can go another 10, 15, 20, 30 moves from this position. There was a game I was watching about a year or so ago. Nakamura had white against, I think it was Nigel Short, but I could be mistaken. And the game ended in a draw, but black ended up with the better of it as it was going. I think black even had the bishop pair, and the board opened up. I've known a lot of players that play the Marshall, and they stand by it and say it shouldn't lose for black with correct play. So. But mainline says g3, and white commits a serious error here with h3. And this just allows black to more or less have his way. And white blunders again. I'll come up with a solution for you in a moment here, what he could try, but his game isn't any good. g3. Now black just goes and takes another pawn and says, hey, thank you. I'm a pawn up, and my attack is on. Your king position is shattered. What are you going to do? Clearly, if pawn takes, queen takes check, followed by a mate on g2, so white develops his queen. But now black has a little trick, check here. And if black takes the bishop, he's going to at least lose his queen and probably his king soon after. With bishop g4 check. So he parks in the corner, and black goes and threatens a checkmate, and white stops that. But threatening mate again, black can't mate now. White's prevented it, but he can bring his knight into play because white can't take it. There's a back rank mate, and now the threat is simply bishop g2 check, and probably even more than that, the game ends abruptly and allows a mate in one. Now let's back it up slightly. What happens if you take the bishop? Okay, obviously black's going to take this pawn. Bishop h2 check is a serious threat. I think the only move that black has to try to survive is with rook e5, and I'm thinking that black is just rolling up here. Even though white has two pieces for the rook, his king is exposed, and black will get a rook into play here really quick. White just doesn't have the defenders here. I think knight d2 might be met with knight f4, and or even just rook takes e5. Uh, you know, White's in trouble here. His entire queen side isn't developed, and the attack is on. So, when you're playing online correspondence chess, you have a chance to look up the opening, and obviously White didn't. So, why you're not looking up the openings is beyond me, because that's the way to learn chess, correspondence chess. I'm trying to teach it the way it was once played. Uh, People still have the mistaken impression that online chess is a substitute for over-the-board chess. And if your opponent happens to be online, you can maybe rattle off 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 moves and learn very little about chess in the process. Okay? I mean, I became a chess master by playing a lot of correspondence chess. So let's move on to the next game that these two played. Let me close a couple of these files down I don't need. Oops. Nope. Come on back here. There. This was between Miniman and MEDHYAKK. Okay, let's see. There's the other game. Here it is. And this one managed to get 55 moves in. So obviously they're playing way too fast. By a postcard, a 55 move game should take over a year, even with a player in your own country. Okay, reset, enter the PGN, flip the board, so MEDHYAKK is on top, or on bottom rather. Okay, so it follows, this starts to follow the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense. But White opts for a lesser seen line, normally is castle's queenside. And, the game should be level. This isn't as popular. Now you got to watch d4, so he saves the knight. It's not as popular as the main lines, but Black should be fine here. And White comes up with an interesting strategy. Give up the knight, or the bishop pair, to get an outpost with a knight on d5. And they're just moving their pieces around a little bit, get the queen off the discovery, and Black tries to activate his bishop. And actually, he should be keeping it there because he gets a little too fancy with it. He should be keeping it on f6 because now White comes up with a positional sacrifice to open up some lines, f6. This wouldn't have happened had Black kept his bishop on f6. So let's see what happens. I think White misses the strongest move. Bishop g4. Let's look at it. The idea is to put the bishop on f5 and get the queen over and try to administer a mate on h7. And nothing is forced here, but let's suppose Black saves his rook. Okay, here comes. There's an interesting thing here. Check. King here. Now White actually has an interesting sacrifice. If Black accepts, I think he's going to run into some serious trouble here. Let's see which rook. I'll bring this rook up. Okay, the threat is to checkmate one move. Let's see. Black could have played his king to g7. There's a reason. Let's do it that way. Now rook d3, and I'll show you how these defenses fail. If rook h8. Just check, and you lose next move, king f8, queen takes mate on h8. If rook g8, just check, king up, check. We're forcing him away, and I think this is pretty much curtains for Black. He's now down the exchange. He's going to lose more. There's really no point in showing you much more. And this wasn't a forced line, but it kind of shows how serious this position became once White opened up that diagonal for his bishop. So, but queen g3 check's okay too. Whoops, not that. Queen g3 check. This is one drawback. I hope the new live chess that they're coming improves the interface. When you play a sideline, in the notes, it replaces the main line with the side line as the main variation, which shouldn't happen. And when you're analyzing a whole bunch, it gets very difficult to find the correct continuation of the game. So anyway, they're both playing reasonable moves, but White's just up material. I mean, up positionally, not material yet. He's sacrificed a pawn. Black has what, 7 pawns? White has 6. But the extra pawn's a double pawn, and White's having all the fun here. And White just finally decides to liquidate into a winning endgame. And there's plenty of pressure on d6. White's got his pawn back. d6 is going to fall, and the rest is more or less routine. And he makes some more trades and got the rooks off. Now, if you're not familiar with knight and pawn endings, usually, not always, but almost always, the way to evaluate a knight and pawn ending is imagine the knight's off the board. Who wins the king and pawn ending? If you can tell that with certainty, you can probably tell who's winning the knight and pawn ending. Well, White's a pawn up and would win this king and pawn ending. But it's just a matter of utilizing all his pieces and pawns. So White starts activating the king. And now the drawback with Black playing f5 was this is going to let White force an outside pass pawn. Black shouldn't have done that. Black should have just tried to blockade the position, make White penetrate on the queen side with this king and lock up this king side, because now the win becomes very routine. White's going to get an outside pass pawn, which will deflect the Black king from the king side, or from the queen side, allowing the White king to just penetrate. So I blame this on playing too fast. You know, it's an elementary ending, and should be main endgame knowledge. If you don't know it, hopefully you do now. And those of you that didn't know it, hopefully you do now. We'll come back and talk about that just for a brief time when we get this done. Now the knight was trapped, and Black just can't get the pawns off. White's going to always keep one pawn, and there it is, and he resigns. So reasonable play for playing quick, but a better defense would have been just keep that bishop on f6 and not allow White that positional sack. Let's see, where were we? We were looking for when he played f5. I have to look through the score of the moves. Let's see. Okay, suppose Black tries f6. Now this does weaken the e6 square, but it serves a purpose too, that it doesn't allow White to get an outside pass pawn. And if White's not careful, maybe Black can generate some counterplay. Let me illustrate. Now, the timing may not be right for this, but what about g4 or h4? Now, if pawn takes, suddenly Black will regain this pawn. Okay, he will regain it. And if this king tries to enter somehow on the queen side, and that's not clear how to do it, this e4 pawn may become a burden, or maybe Black can later create a pass pawn of his own. And the alternative would, on h4, I'm not saying these are the best move, we're just analyzing. On g4, now the pawns are locked. White doesn't have an entry point for his king, unless he does a sacrifice later. Let's see. Now we try g5. But maybe Black gets back in time. See? White hasn't really gained anything. Okay? And let's actually take that a little further. Let's if the Black king was decoyed over to this side of the board for some reason, say Black was trying to penetrate, how many moves is White from queening? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Probably safer to queen the h-pawn because black may be able to stop the e-pawn. White's still 8 moves from a queen. Black gets 8 moves too. Can he get rid of the white pawns and get his knight back in time? That's going to be a tough task. But you know, how can white improve his position? In the meantime, c4, black doesn't have to take it. He could, but he doesn't have to. Let's just wiggle the king 1 move. Okay, now take. I'm doing this to create a pass pawn for white. Okay, now the king gets in the game. Okay. Let's see, knight b3 just to take c5. See, white's got the 5th rank covered. Black can't penetrate. But now the black knight is active, and let's see, put the knight here. Okay, a5. Now the pawn might be coming too far advanced. I don't think he can get away with this check but we can stop that pawn in its tracks. Now let's see. Now let's try this g5 break. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Okay. Let's go here. Take. Now here. Now this is getting tricky. Probably best to take the h-pawn and save it, and save this h-pawn. This is getting close to a theoretical draw. Close. This knight permanently protects this. Anyway, you can kind of see some of the ideas, but it's good for analysis. But black didn't have to play h4, but I wanted to just illustrate it a little bit to try to share a little bit about knight and pawn endings. f6. Then I was playing what for white? I was playing king e3. Well, let's bring our king over. Okay. Now let's get the king over here because we have a pawn majority. Now we'll send this over here. The idea being of not allowing white to create an outside pass pawn is these pawns become neutralized and you try to defend over here on the queen side. So let's see whose move is this. White's. Let's go ahead with c4 and let's activate the king. Take. Now we get our pass pawn. Take. King here. Now we don't have to play knight b3. We can bring the king up. But again, now the black knight is set free. That stops a5. It doesn't stop king b5. But then maybe the black knight can run over here to the king side and start generating some counterplay. You know, White's still favorite. White probably has a theoretical win, but I think the point of what I'm trying to show is that the task for White to win is a lot more difficult than it actually turned out, because what Black did was Black just allowed an immediate penetration of his king into the black queen side, and the black knight actually fell. It was trapped, and black couldn't get his king over to the queen side to attack the pawns quick enough. So that's my point here. I think theoretically White is still winning, but you want to make your opponent earn it, because it just takes one inaccuracy on White's part, and the game suddenly becomes a draw. You have to fight. You have to keep fighting. So I've seen a lot of endings that lower ranked players do, and trust me, they miss a lot of opportunities just by missing little nuances like we had here. Black allowed white to get an outside pass pawn, and then the white king had a direct beeline into the to invade the queen side. Here, black held his own, kept the pawns at bay on the king side, and just played a pawn down on the queen side. And white will eventually get his pass pawn. There's no stopping that, but black is still alive. That's the point. Okay, thanks so much for looking. Take care.